Sergeant Tommy Sullivan was adjusting Thunder's tactical harness for what would be their final patrol through the mountain passes of eastern Afghanistan. The German shepherd's dark eyes alert and trusting as his handler checked each piece of gear with methodical precision. That December night, both man and dog vanished without a trace during what intelligence had classified as a routine convoy escort through Taliban territory, leaving behind only scattered equipment and unanswered questions that would haunt 2 continents. 3 years later, in the snow-covered town of Millbrook, Colorado, Tommy's 11-year-old daughter, Emma Kate, discovers something in the behavior of a traumatized military dog that makes her blood freeze in her veins and changes everything she thought she knew about her father's death. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Millbrook, Colorado, population 3, 847, clung to the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains like a town that had forgotten how to let go. The December wind carved through streets lined with modest ranch houses and double-wide trailers, past the single stoplight that blinked yellow through most winter nights, past Sullivan's garage where Tommy used to work on weekends before his deployment. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, where military families made up half the population, and where secrets had a way of surfacing when the snow melted each spring. Emma Kate Sullivan lived with her mother Sarah in a pale blue ranch house on Copper Creek Road, 3 blocks from where the pavement ended and the wilderness began. At 11, Emma moved through the world with the careful precision of someone who understood that sounds could hurt, that unexpected touch felt like lightning, and that most people spoke in puzzles she was still learning to decode. Her autism made certain things impossible and others crystal clear. She could tell you the exact number of birds that visited their backyard feeder each morning, but struggled to understand why her mother cried when she thought Emma wasn't watching. The military dog tags that had belonged to her father hung around Emma's neck, worn smooth by 3 years of worried fingers. Tommy Sullivan had been her anchor in a world that often felt too loud, too bright, too fast. He was the one who taught her to read the language of animals, who sat patiently while she arranged her collection of smooth river stones in perfect patterns, who never made her feel broken for being different. Sarah Sullivan carried herself like a woman balancing on a tightrope stretched between grief and determination. At 38, the former Army psychiatric nurse worked double shifts at Millbrook General Hospital, her hands steady as she administered medication to patients, while her mind wrestled with questions that had no answers. She had spent her military career helping soldiers process trauma, but nothing had prepared her for the hollow ache of losing Tommy, or the fierce protectiveness she felt watching Emma navigate a world that didn't always understand her daughter's unique way of seeing. The Sullivan women lived quietly, carefully, in the shadow of a loss that had redefined their universe. Neither of them knew that 100 miles away, in a climate-controlled kennel at the Colorado Springs Animal Shelter, a German shepherd named Thunder paced behind steel bars, carrying secrets that would soon shatter their carefully constructed peace. The annual Blackwood Foundation Winter Charity Auction sprawled across the Billionaire's mountain estate like a carefully orchestrated display of power disguised as philanthropy. William "Billy" Blackwood had spared no expense transforming his 30,000-square-foot lodge into a winter wonderland designed to separate Colorado's elite from their money in the name of helping veterans. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables laden with silent auction items, while servers in black uniforms circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres among guests who wore their wealth like armor against the mountain cold. Sarah Sullivan adjusted her second-hand dress and tried to ignore the stares as she and Emma made their way through the crowd. They didn't belong here among the oil executives and tech moguls, but the invitation had arrived unexpectedly 2 weeks ago, along with a personal note expressing Blackwood's desire to honor military families. Sarah's instincts, honed by years of reading people in psychiatric settings, told her something felt wrong about the gesture. But the $1,000 donation to the Tommy Sullivan Memorial Fund had been too generous to ignore. Emma walked close to her mother's side, her hands pressed over her ears to muffle the overwhelming cacophony of voices, clinking glasses, and background music. The sensory assault made her teeth ache, but she forced herself to observe the patterns in the crowd, the way conversations stopped when they passed, the subtle shift in body language that told her they were objects of curiosity rather than welcome guests. The evening's entertainment began with a presentation of Blackwood's latest charitable initiatives, delivered with the polished confidence of a man accustomed to applause. At 52, he commanded attention effortlessly, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom suit tailored to emphasize his imposing frame. He spoke of supporting veterans, of understanding sacrifice, of using his resources to make a difference. Sarah found herself studying his face, searching for the sincerity that seemed just slightly out of reach behind his practiced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood announced as the formal presentation concluded, "tonight we have a special challenge that will test the very limits of human compassion and skill." He gestured toward a side door where two handlers in protective gear emerged, struggling to control a massive German shepherd on a reinforced leash. The dog's coat was matted and scarred, his eyes wild with a terror that seemed to consume him from within. "This is Thunder, a military working dog whose service in Afghanistan has left him, shall we say, difficult to manage." Emma felt the air leave her lungs as she stared at the animal. Something about the dog's movement, the way he held his head, the specific pattern of scars along his right shoulder, triggered a memory she couldn't quite grasp. Thunder. She had heard that name before, whispered in conversations between adults who thought she wasn't listening, mentioned in phone calls her mother took in the other room. 4 professional trainers have declared Thunder untrainable, Blackwood continued, his voice carrying the theatrical tone of a showman. "Animal control has scheduled him for euthanasia next week. But I believe in second chances, especially for our military heroes." The crowd murmured appreciatively. "Therefore, I'm offering $1 million to anyone who can make this animal sit calmly beside them for 5 uninterrupted minutes. $1 million, tax-free." The handlers struggled to maintain control as Thunder lunged against his restraints, his powerful body trembling with barely contained panic. Emma watched the way he reacted to specific sounds. The radio static from security guards' walkie-talkies, the helicopter passing overhead, the sharp crack of champagne corks. Each noise sent him into fresh waves of agitation. But there was a pattern to his responses that spoke to something deeper than simple aggression. 3 professional dog trainers stepped forward to accept the challenge, each armed with the tools of their trade: shock collars, cattle prods, dominance techniques designed to break a dog's will. Thunder's reaction was immediate and violent, his military training evident in the calculated precision of his defensive maneuvers. He wasn't attacking randomly. He was protecting himself with the skills that had once saved soldiers' lives in combat zones. "Enough," Emma said, the word barely audible above the crowd's nervous laughter. She stepped forward before her mother could stop her, moving with the deliberate calm that came naturally when the world became too overwhelming to process in conventional ways. The laughter died as the small girl in the borrowed dress approached the traumatized military dog. "Emma, no," Sarah whispered, but something in her daughter's posture, the absolute certainty in her movement, kept her from intervening. Emma had always possessed an uncanny ability to read animals, to understand their emotional states in ways that seemed almost supernatural, but were really just the product of intense observation and pattern recognition. Emma ignored the gasps and warnings from the crowd as she sat cross-legged on the marble floor 3 feet from Thunder's powerful jaws. She didn't make eye contact, didn't reach toward him, didn't speak in the high-pitched tones most people used with frightened animals. Instead, she began to hum, a low, wordless melody that seemed to rise from some deep place in her memory. Thunder's reaction was immediate and startling. The wild trembling stopped. His ears swiveled toward the sound, and for the first time since entering the room, he looked directly at another living being without fury in his eyes. Emma continued humming, the melody resolving into what sounded like a lullaby, something gentle and familiar and safe. "I know you," Emma whispered, her voice so soft only Thunder could hear. "I know you remember him. I remember him too." She extended one small hand, palm up, not reaching but offering. "He used to sing that song when you couldn't sleep, in the desert, when the bombs were too loud and you were both scared." Thunder took one step forward, then another, his massive frame moving with sudden gentleness as he approached the small girl. The crowd held its collective breath as the dog that had been deemed uncontrollable lowered himself to the floor beside Emma, his dark head coming to rest against her shoulder. The silence stretched for an eternity before Emma spoke again, her words carrying clearly in the hushed ballroom. "His name was Tommy Sullivan. He was my daddy, and you were his partner." She turned to look directly at Blackwood, her eyes holding a clarity that made several adults step backward. "You said 5 minutes, but Thunder's been waiting 3 years to tell someone what really happened to my father." Thunder's low whine seemed to confirm her words, a sound of such profound grief that it cut through the sophisticated veneer of the evening like a blade. As Emma's 5 minutes ticked past without incident, as the crowd began to realize they were witnessing something far more significant than a training demonstration, William Blackwood's confident smile finally cracked, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. The check he wrote was for exactly $1 million. But his eyes promised that Emma Kate Sullivan had just made the most dangerous enemy of her young life. The ride home from Blackwood's estate passed in tense silence, Thunder occupying the entire back seat of Sarah's aging Honda Civic like he had always belonged there. Emma sat twisted around in the passenger seat, one hand resting on the dog's massive head, her fingers tracing the scars that mapped his history across his fur. She hadn't spoken since they left the mansion, but her eyes held a focus that Sarah recognized as her daughter's way of processing information too complex for immediate words. "Emma," Sarah said gently, as they pulled into their driveway, "how did you know that dog's name? How did you know about your father, singing to him?" The questions had been building during the 40-minute drive, each mile adding weight to the impossibilities she had witnessed in Blackwood's ballroom. Emma's response came in fragments, the way her thoughts often emerged when she was working through something profound. The scars on his shoulder. Daddy had a picture in his desk drawer. Thunder was smaller then. She paused, her hands still moving in slow circles across the dog's fur. He flinches when people wear black clothes. Daddy's letters said the bad men wore black. He flinches at radio sounds, helicopter sounds. Daddy wrote about those sounds in the desert. Sarah felt her breath catch as pieces began clicking into place. She had read Tommy's letters dozens of times in the months after his death, searching for clues that might explain why a routine patrol had ended in catastrophe. He had mentioned Thunder frequently, describing the dog's intelligence, his loyalty, the way he seemed to understand human emotions with uncanny precision. But Thunder was supposed to have died with Tommy in the IED explosion that claimed both their lives. That night, while Emma slept with Thunder curled protectively at the foot of her bed, Sarah retrieved the box of Tommy's personal effects from the closet where it had remained untouched for 2 years. The Army had returned everything: his journals, letters, photographs, and the encrypted laptop that she had never been able to access. With shaking hands, she spread the photographs across the kitchen table, searching for the image Emma had mentioned. The picture was smaller than she remembered, tucked between pages of a field manual Tommy had been studying. It showed a younger Thunder, perhaps 2 years old, sitting alert beside a grinning Tommy in desert camouflage. On the back, in Tommy's careful handwriting, "Thunder, my partner, my friend, my backup. If anything happens to me, someone needs to take care of him. He's seen too much to be just another dog." Sarah stared at the photograph until the image blurred through tears. If Thunder was alive, if he had somehow survived the attack that killed Tommy, then everything the Army had told her about that night might be a lie. She thought about Blackwood's reaction to Emma's words, the way his confidence had cracked when confronted with the truth Thunder carried, a truth that apparently only her autistic daughter could access through some intuitive connection with the traumatized animal. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. Deputy Sheriff Jake Morrison arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, his patrol car idling in the driveway while he approached their front door with the measured stride of someone accustomed to delivering bad news. "Mrs. Sullivan," Morrison said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that managed to be both respectful and threatening, "I need to discuss the incident at Mr. Blackwood's event last night. There are concerns about your daughter's interaction with a dangerous animal." Sarah kept her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. "My daughter helped calm a frightened dog. I fail to see how that constitutes an incident requiring police intervention." Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That dog has been declared dangerous by animal control. Multiple bite incidents, destroyed property, injured handlers. Your daughter put herself and others at risk by interfering with a scheduled euthanization." He pulled a clipboard from his jacket. "I need to file a report about last night's events. There are questions about whether proper supervision was provided for a minor with special needs." The emphasis on those last words made Sarah's blood boil. But she recognized the tactical nature of Morrison's visit. This wasn't about Emma's safety. This was about control, about making sure the Sullivan family understood their place in whatever larger game was being played. "My daughter has autism, Deputy Morrison, not special needs that prevent her from making sound decisions about animal behavior. In fact, her condition gives her insights that most people lack." Sarah crossed her arms, blocking his view into the house where Emma and Thunder were likely listening to every word. "If you want to file a report, you're welcome to do so. But I suggest you include the fact that my daughter accomplished in 5 minutes what professional trainers couldn't do in hours." Morrison's facade of politeness slipped slightly. "Mrs. Sullivan, I strongly advise you to return that animal to county custody immediately. Harboring a dangerous dog puts your family at risk, both legally and physically. Mr. Blackwood has expressed concern about the precedent this sets for other unstable animals in the community." "Is that a threat, Deputy?" "It's friendly advice from someone who's seen what happens when people don't listen to reasonable warnings." Morrison tucked his clipboard away. His message delivered. "You have 24 hours to surrender the animal voluntarily. After that, we'll be forced to take more direct action." After Morrison left, Sarah found Emma in her bedroom, sitting on the floor with Thunder's head in her lap. The dog's eyes were alert but calm, his breathing steady for the first time since she had seen him at the auction. Emma was humming the same melody from the night before, her fingers working through Thunder's fur with the systematic precision she brought to all her routines. "Mom," Emma said without looking up, "Thunder wants to tell us something important about Daddy. But he's scared. He's been scared for 3 years because nobody could understand what he was trying to say." Sarah sat down beside them, studying the unlikely pair that had formed such an immediate bond. "What kind of something, sweetheart?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her hand stilling against Thunder's neck where she could feel his pulse. "He was there when Daddy died. He saw who did it, but they weren't wearing the same uniforms as Daddy. They were wearing black clothes, like the man with the police car, like some of the men at the big house last night." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, confirming suspicions she had been afraid to voice even to herself. If Emma was right, if Thunder had witnessed Tommy's murder rather than accidental death, then her husband had died not as a casualty of war, but as a victim of something far more sinister. That evening, Sarah made 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Dr. Michael Harrison, a military veterinarian whose name appeared frequently in Tommy's letters. The second was to Judge Patricia Mills, a federal judge whose reputation for prosecuting military corruption had made her both respected and feared in equal measure. Both conversations confirmed what Sarah was beginning to understand. Tommy Sullivan had stumbled across something worth killing for, and Thunder was the only witness left alive to tell that story. The question now was whether an 11-year-old girl with autism and a traumatized military dog could survive long enough to ensure that truth saw daylight. Outside their modest ranch house, the Colorado wind carried the promise of snow and the certainty that Deputy Morrison would return tomorrow with more than friendly advice. Dr. Michael Harrison arrived at the Sullivan house just after dawn, his weathered pickup truck crunching over the frost-covered gravel driveway like a promise of answers Sarah had been desperate to find. At 45, the military veterinarian carried himself with the careful precision of someone who had spent years treating animals damaged by human conflict, his gray eyes holding the kind of wisdom that came from witnessing too much suffering and not enough justice. Thunder's reaction to Harrison's arrival was immediate and telling. The dog positioned himself between Emma and the stranger, but his posture lacked the aggressive tension that had marked his interactions with other adults. Instead, he displayed the alert wariness of a soldier recognizing a former ally whose allegiances remained uncertain. "Easy, boy," Harrison said softly, crouching down to Thunder's eye level without making direct contact. "I know you remember me, Kandahar, 2019. You had shrapnel in your left shoulder. Wouldn't let anyone but Tommy near you for 3 days. He slowly extended his hand, palm up, the same gesture Emma had used at the auction. "I'm the one who stitched you up while Tommy held your head and sang that lullaby." Emma looked up sharply from where she sat cross-legged beside Thunder. "You knew my daddy. You knew about the song." Harrison's expression softened as he studied the girl whose autism seemed to create bridges where others saw only barriers. "Your father saved my life twice in Afghanistan. Emma, once from enemy fire, and once from giving up hope when the things we saw over there got too heavy to carry alone." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn photograph showing Tommy, Thunder, and himself standing beside a military medical tent. "Tommy talked about you constantly, showed this picture to anyone who'd look, said you were going to change the world someday because you saw things the rest of us missed." Sarah felt tears threatening as she studied the photograph, seeing her husband's face young and hopeful in a way that seemed impossibly distant from the man who had returned from his final deployment in a flag-draped coffin. "Dr. Harrison, what really happened over there? The Army told us Tommy died in an IED explosion, but if Thunder is alive—" "Thunder wasn't supposed to survive," Harrison interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of carefully guarded secrets. "The official report states that both Sergeant Sullivan and his K-9 partner were killed when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device on December 15, 2020. I signed the death certificate for Thunder myself." He paused, watching the dog's ears prick forward at the mention of familiar names and dates. "What the report doesn't mention is that I falsified that certificate to protect him." Emma's hand stilled against Thunder's fur as she processed this information with the methodical precision her autism brought to complex problems. "You lied to save him, because he knew something that would get him killed, too. Your daughter understands things that most adults can't grasp," Harrison said to Sarah, admiration clear in his voice. "Yes, Emma, I lied because Thunder witnessed your father's murder, and the people responsible were willing to kill anyone who could expose them. The next hour unfolded like a nightmare made of fragments and half-truths finally assembled into coherent horror." Harrison explained how Tommy had discovered irregularities in supply shipments passing through their forward operating base. Humanitarian aid that contained hidden compartments filled with military-grade weapons destined for arms dealers rather than Afghan civilians. Tommy's investigation had uncovered a network involving high-ranking military officials, defense contractors, and wealthy American businessmen who were profiting from the war while pretending to support humanitarian efforts. Your father was preparing to report his findings to military intelligence when the convoy was attacked, Harrison continued, his words careful and measured. But it wasn't Taliban fighters who ambushed them. It was American mercenaries hired to eliminate anyone who could expose the arms-dealing operation. Sarah felt the room spinning as pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The men in black uniforms that Emma mentioned, the radio sounds that make Thunder panic. You're saying my husband was murdered by Americans? Thunder was in the lead vehicle with Tommy when the attack began, Harrison explained, his eyes never leaving the dog who seemed to be listening to every word. He managed to escape during the firefight, but not before witnessing everything. I found him 3 days later, half dead from injuries and trauma. The mercenaries assumed he'd died with Tommy, so I made that assumption official." Emma stood abruptly, her movement sharp with the kind of agitation that preceded her most difficult moments. She began pacing in the tight pattern that helped her process overwhelming information, her hands flapping at her sides in the stimming behavior that others often misunderstood as distress, but which actually helped regulate her sensory input. "The big man with the fancy house," she said suddenly, stopping mid-pace to stare directly at Harrison. "Mr. Blackwood. Thunder gets scared when he smells that cologne, the same smell from the bad men in the desert." Her voice carried the flat certainty that marked her most important observations. "He was one of the people who wanted Daddy dead." Harrison's face went pale. "Emma, that's a very serious accusation. What makes you think Mr. Blackwood was involved?" "Thunder knows," Emma replied simply. "His heart beats faster when that man talks. His muscles get tight. Dogs remember smells better than faces. Thunder remembers the smell of the man who gave the orders." The implications struck Sarah like physical blows. If Emma was right, then Blackwood's charity auction hadn't been coincidence but calculated risk assessment. He had needed to see Thunder to determine whether the dog posed a threat to his carefully constructed empire. Emma's unexpected connection with Thunder had turned what should have been a simple evaluation into a potential catastrophe for everyone involved. "We need to leave," Sarah said suddenly, maternal instinct overriding all other considerations. "If Blackwood knows that Thunder can identify him, if he realizes Emma can somehow understand what Thunder witnessed, then we're all in danger." But even as she spoke, Sarah could see Emma shaking her head with the stubborn determination that marked her most uncompromising decisions. "We can't leave, Mom. Thunder's been trying to tell someone the truth for 3 years. If we run away, Daddy's murder will never matter. The bad men will keep hurting people." Harrison studied the unlikely pair, the autistic girl and the traumatized military dog who seemed to share a communication system that transcended conventional understanding. "Emma, what you're suggesting is extremely dangerous. These people have killed before, and they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who threatens them." "I'm not suggesting anything," Emma replied with the literal precision that characterized her speech patterns. "I'm stating facts. Thunder has information that proves Mr. Blackwood committed crimes. I can understand what Thunder is trying to communicate. Therefore, we have evidence that could stop the bad men from hurting other families like they hurt ours." The afternoon brought confirmation of their worst fears when Judge Patricia Mills called Sarah's cell phone with news that sent ice through her veins. The federal investigation into military corruption had been mysteriously stalled. Key witnesses had recanted their testimony, and crucial evidence had disappeared from secure facilities. Someone with significant resources and connections was systematically dismantling the case against the arms-dealing network. "Mrs. Sullivan," Judge Mills said, her voice tight with frustration, "I'm going to be direct with you. My investigation has been compromised from the inside. Someone is feeding information to the targets, staying one step ahead of every move we make. If your daughter and that dog really do have evidence about your husband's murder, they may be our last chance to bring these criminals to justice." That evening, Sarah found herself facing an impossible choice. She could pack up Emma and Thunder and disappear, abandoning their life in Millbrook, but keeping her daughter safe from people who had already proven their willingness to kill, or she could trust in Emma's extraordinary abilities and fight for the truth that Tommy had died trying to expose. The decision was taken out of her hands when Emma approached her at bedtime, Thunder padding silently at her side like a protective shadow. "Mom, I had a dream about Daddy last night. He told me that running away from bad people just makes them stronger. He said that sometimes being different means you have to do things that scare other people because you're the only one who can see what needs to be done." Sarah looked at her daughter, seeing Tommy's determination reflected in Emma's eyes despite their completely different neurological wiring. Emma's autism, which the world often viewed as a limitation, had become the key to understanding communications that others couldn't access. Her literal thinking, her pattern recognition, her ability to read emotional states through subtle physical cues, all combined to create a unique translator for Thunder's traumatic memories. "If we do this," Sarah said carefully, "if we try to expose what really happened to your father, there won't be any going back. These people will do everything they can to stop us." Emma's response came with the matter-of-fact clarity that made her both vulnerable and formidable. "They already killed Daddy because he tried to do the right thing. If we don't finish what he started, then his death doesn't mean anything. Thunder knows that. That's why he's been waiting for someone who could understand him." Thunder's low whine seemed to confirm her words, a sound of agreement that carried 3 years of patient hope finally given voice through an 11-year-old girl who saw the world differently than everyone else. Outside their window, the Colorado darkness held watching eyes and patient malice. But inside the modest ranch house, an unlikely alliance was forming between a grieving mother, an autistic child, and a traumatized military dog who carried the power to bring down an empire built on blood and betrayal. The war for truth was about to begin, and Emma Kate Sullivan intended to win it using weapons her enemies would never see coming. The confrontation began at dawn on the third day, when Deputy Sheriff Jake Morrison arrived with 3 additional patrol cars and an animal control van, their red and blue lights cutting through the early morning mist like harbingers of violence. Sarah watched through the kitchen window as uniformed officers positioned themselves around their property with military precision, their movements coordinated and purposeful in a way that suggested this was more than a simple animal seizure. Emma sat at the kitchen table with Thunder beside her chair, both of them unnaturally still as they observed the unfolding threat. The dog's ears were pinned back against his skull, his muscles coiled with tension. But he remained calm under Emma's steadying hand. She had been awake since 4 o'clock, humming the lullaby that seemed to center them both, preparing for what her pattern recognition abilities had told her was inevitable. "Mrs.
Sullivan," Morrison called through a megaphone, his voice amplified and distorted by the electronic device. "We have a court order for the immediate seizure of a dangerous animal. Send the dog out peacefully, and no one needs to get hurt." Sarah opened the front door, but remained on the threshold, her body language carefully controlled despite the fear racing through her system. "I'd like to see that court order, Deputy Morrison, and I'd like to know which judge signed it at 6 o'clock in the morning." Morrison's smile was cold as he approached, flanked by 2 officers whose hands rested casually on their service weapons. Judge Hartwell was very concerned about public safety after reviewing the incident reports from Mr. Blackwood's event. That animal has already demonstrated unpredictable behavior around children. The irony would have been laughable if the situation weren't so terrifying. Thunder had shown nothing but protective gentleness toward Emma, while these armed men were treating an 11-year-old girl and her mother as enemy combatants. Sarah recognized the tactical psychology being employed,
create enough intimidation to force compliance before anyone could examine the legal justification too closely. "The dog stays with my daughter," Sarah said firmly. "If you want to discuss this further, you can do it through our attorney." "Ma'am, we're not here to negotiate," one of the other officers interjected, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of having his commands obeyed without question. "That animal is coming with us today, one way or another." Emma appeared in the doorway beside her mother, Thunder moving with fluid grace to position himself between the girl and the armed men. The dog's posture was alert but controlled, his training evident in the way he assessed threats while maintaining protective positioning. His dark eyes never left Morrison's face, and Sarah could see recognition there, the same fearful alertness he had shown when encountering certain scents and sounds. "Thunder knows you," Emma said suddenly, her voice carrying across the yard with startling clarity. "He remembers your voice from the radio, the night Daddy died. You were one of the men talking to the bad guys in the desert." Morrison's confident expression flickered for just a moment, long enough for Sarah to catch the flash of something dangerous beneath his professional facade. The child is obviously confused. Combat stress affects military animals in unpredictable ways, causes them to react aggressively to authority figures. But Emma wasn't confused, and her autism gave her the ability to focus on details that others might miss or dismiss. She studied Morrison's micro-expressions, his body language, the way his breathing changed when Thunder looked directly at him. The patterns were unmistakable to someone whose brain processed social information differently than neurotypical individuals. "You smell like fear," Emma observed with the brutal honesty that often made adults uncomfortable. "Thunder can smell it too. That's why you want him dead. Because he knows what you did to my daddy." The standoff stretched taut as morning sunlight crept across the yard, highlighting the surreal nature of the scene. Heavily armed law enforcement officers facing down a small girl and her dog in suburban Colorado. Sarah could see neighbors beginning to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion, their presence adding witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. "Doctor," Harrison's pickup truck rounded the corner at exactly the right moment, followed closely by a black sedan that Sarah didn't recognize. The veterinarian emerged from his vehicle with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to defusing volatile situations, while a woman in her 60s stepped out of the sedan with the bearing of someone who expected to be obeyed. "Judge Mills," Morrison said, his voice tight with surprise and something that might have been fear. "Ma'am, this is a local matter, well within our jurisdiction." Judge Patricia Mills surveyed the scene with the sharp eyes of someone who had spent decades seeing through official lies and bureaucratic cover-ups. "Deputy Morrison, I'm here because this local matter intersects with a federal investigation into military corruption and murder. I suggest you reconsider your approach." The tension ratcheted higher as Morrison realized his carefully planned operation was spiraling beyond his control. Sarah could see him calculating odds, weighing the risks of proceeding against the dangers of backing down. His radio crackled with static, and Thunder's reaction was immediate and telling. The dog pressed closer to Emma, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow in response to the familiar sound that triggered memories of that terrible night in Afghanistan. Emma noticed Thunder's distress and responded with the intuitive understanding that marked their unique relationship. She knelt beside the dog, placing both hands on his massive head, and began humming the lullaby that had first connected them. The melody seemed to anchor Thunder, helping him distinguish between past trauma
and present reality. "He's remembering," Emma said softly, but her words carried clearly in the morning air. The radio sounds. The voices of men who weren't supposed to be there. Thunder was hiding in the rocks when they called their boss to report that Daddy was dead. Judge Mills stepped forward, her attention focused intently on the girl and dog. "Emma, can you tell me what Thunder remembers about those voices?" Emma's response came in the fragmented but precise way she processed complex information. 3 men in black clothes, not soldiers. They had the wrong equipment for desert fighting. One of them talked on the radio to someone called Control. He said the package was delivered and the witness was eliminated, but they missed Thunder hiding in the rocks. Morrison's hand moved toward his service weapon, a subtle shift that didn't escape Dr. Harrison's notice. The veterinarian positioned himself strategically, his own military training evident in the way he assessed the tactical situation developing around them. "Stand down, deputy," Judge Mills commanded, her voice carrying decades of courtroom authority. "This child is providing testimony in a federal murder investigation. Any attempt to interfere with that testimony will result in obstruction of justice charges." But Morrison was beyond rational calculation now, his desperation evident as his carefully constructed cover began unraveling in front of witnesses he couldn't intimidate or eliminate. Sarah saw the moment when he decided that killing them all was preferable to exposure, his hand closing around his weapon grip with deadly intent. Thunder saw it too, his military training overriding his trauma as the immediate threat to Emma became clear. The dog moved with lightning speed, not to attack, but to shield, placing his body between Morrison and the girl with the kind of precision that spoke to years of combat experience and unshakable loyalty. "Gun." "Dr." Harrison shouted, his own weapon appearing with practiced efficiency as the situation exploded into chaos. Emma didn't scream or panic as the adults around her drew weapons and shouted commands. Instead, she pressed herself against Thunder's side and continued humming, her autism helping her maintain focus on what mattered most, keeping the dog calm enough to make good decisions rather than reactive ones. The standoff lasted only seconds, but felt eternal. Law enforcement officers uncertain whether to follow Morrison's lead or Judge Mills's authority. Everyone acutely aware that one wrong move would transform a residential street into a battlefield. Thunder remained perfectly still, his body a living shield, his dark eyes fixed on Morrison with the unwavering attention of a trained soldier identifying a threat. It was Morrison who blinked first, his nerve failing as he realized that killing a federal judge, a military veterinarian, and a mother and child would create more problems than it solved. His hand moved away from his weapon, but his eyes promised that this confrontation was far from over. "This isn't finished," he said quietly, his words meant for Sarah but audible to everyone present. "That dog is still dangerous, and that child needs proper supervision. I'll be watching." Judge Mill's response was ice-cold and final. "Deputy Morrison, you're relieved of duty pending investigation into your conduct. Any further contact with the Sullivan family will be considered harassment and obstruction of justice." As the patrol cars slowly withdrew, leaving only tire tracks and the lingering scent of fear in the morning air, Emma finally looked up from Thunder's side. Her autism allowed her to process the morning's events with clarity that most people would find impossible under such stress. "Mom," she said simply.
Thunder says we need to find the place where Daddy died. There's something there that proves Mr. Blackwood ordered the murder, something the bad men didn't know they left behind.
The journey to Afghanistan began with a phone call that would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life. Judge Mills had used her federal authority to arrange military transport for what she termed evidence recovery in support of an ongoing investigation. But the clinical language couldn't mask the reality that they were taking an 11-year-old autistic girl and a traumatized military dog back to the place where nightmares lived. Emma had insisted on going with a determination that brooked no argument, her autism creating the kind of focused obsession that made compromise impossible. "Thunder needs to show us where Daddy hid the evidence," she explained with the matter-of-fact clarity that characterized her most important statements. "He can't tell us with words, so he has to show us with his body. If we don't go, the bad men win forever." The military transport plane was a study in controlled chaos, filled with soldiers rotating back to active duty and equipment bound for forward operating bases scattered across the Middle East. Thunder rode in a specially constructed kennel beside Emma's seat, his dark eyes alert but calm as long as she maintained physical contact through the mesh. The dog's presence had an unexpected effect on the battle-hardened soldiers around them, many of whom approached cautiously to share stories of their own canine partners and the bonds that transcended species in combat zones. Dr. Harrison accompanied them as both veterinary support and military liaison, his connections from years of treating wounded animals in war zones opening doors that would have remained closed to civilians. He watched Emma's interaction with Thunder during the 18-hour flight, marveling at how her autism seemed to create a communication channel that bypassed conventional language entirely. "She reads his emotional state through micro-expressions and body language," Harrison explained to Sarah as they watched Emma sleeping with one hand pressed against Thunder's kennel. "Most people process social information through learned cultural cues, but Emma's brain works differently. She sees the raw emotional truth that others miss." The Kandahar Air Base stretched endlessly under harsh fluorescent lights and the perpetual dust that seemed to coat everything in Afghanistan with the same gray patina of war. Sarah felt her breath catch as they disembarked. The reality of bringing her daughter to this place hitting her with unexpected force. This was where Tommy had spent his final months, where he had discovered the corruption that cost him his life, where Thunder had witnessed horrors that still haunted his dreams. Emma's reaction to the environment was immediate and complex. The sensory overload of military aircraft, shouting soldiers, and unfamiliar smells should have overwhelmed her autism-related sensitivities. But instead, she seemed to focus with laser intensity on Thunder's responses to their surroundings. The dog's behavior changed dramatically as familiar sights and sounds triggered memory cascades, his movements becoming more purposeful as he recognized landmarks from his previous deployment. The convoy to the ambush site departed at dawn, 4 armored vehicles carrying a small team of investigators, military personnel, and the unlikely civilian family whose presence had been authorized at the highest levels of command. Emma rode in the lead vehicle with Thunder, her hand resting on his neck as she monitored his reactions to the changing landscape outside their bulletproof windows. "He's getting excited," Emma observed as they traveled deeper into Taliban territory under heavy military escort. "Not happy excited, scared excited. Like when you know something important is going to happen, but you don't know if it will be good or bad." The ambush site looked exactly like 1,000 other patches of Afghan desert Rocky. Desolate,
marked only by blast scars and the metal debris that marked every battlefield in this endless war. But Thunder's reaction was immediate and devastating. The dog began trembling violently as they approached the coordinates where Tommy Sullivan had died, his military training warring with trauma-induced panic as memories flooded back with sensory precision. Emma climbed out of the armored vehicle and knelt beside Thunder, her small hands working through his fur as she hummed the lullaby that had become their shared anchor. "I know it hurts to remember," she whispered, "but Daddy needs us to be brave one more time. He needs us to find what he hid so the truth can make the bad men pay." Thunder's response was gradual but unmistakable. His trembling slowed, his breathing steadied, and his eyes began tracking across the battlefield with the methodical precision of a trained search animal following an invisible trail. Emma stood and began walking beside him, her autism allowing her to focus entirely on Thunder's subtle behavioral cues while filtering out the chaos of soldiers and investigators around them. The search took 3 hours under the merciless Afghan sun, Thunder leading them through a maze of rocky outcroppings and blast craters toward a location that existed only in his traumatic memories. Emma translated his movements for the increasingly skeptical military personnel, her autism-enhanced pattern recognition allowing her to read signals that others dismissed as random animal behavior. "He's looking for something specific," Emma explained as Thunder paused beside a jumble of rocks that looked identical to a dozen others they had passed. "Not just a place, a thing. Something Daddy put somewhere safe before the bad men came." Thunder began digging with sudden urgency, his powerful claws scraping away sand and stone with desperate efficiency. Emma knelt beside him, her small hands joining his paws in excavating whatever lay buried beneath 3 years of wind and weather. The soldiers watched with growing amazement as the unlikely pair worked together with perfect coordination, neither needing to communicate their shared purpose through words. The waterproof case emerged from its hiding place like a resurrection, its military-grade construction having protected its contents from the harsh environment that had claimed so much else. Emma's hands shook as she helped Thunder pull the case free, both of them staring at the tangible proof that Tommy Sullivan had been prepared for his own murder. Inside the case, wrapped in protective plastic, were documents that would destroy William Blackwood's empire and expose the corruption that had cost Tommy his life. Financial records showing weapons shipments disguised as humanitarian aid, communications between Blackwood and his mercenary contractors, photographs of illegal arms caches, and most damning of all, a voice recording of Blackwood personally ordering the elimination of that meddling canine handler and his dog. Emma listened to her father's recorded voice one final time as he explained his discoveries and his fears, his words carefully chosen to protect his family while ensuring that the truth would survive even if he didn't. "If something happens to me," Tommy's voice said from beyond the grave, "make sure Thunder gets to Emma. She's the only one who'll understand what he's trying to tell people. She sees things differently, and sometimes different is exactly what the world needs." The flight home was subdued, the weight of evidence and revelation settling over them like the dust that still clung to their clothes from the Afghan desert. Thunder slept peacefully for the first time since his return to civilization, his mission finally complete after 3 years of carrying secrets too heavy for any animal to bear alone. Emma sat beside his kennel with her father's final recording playing softly through headphones, her autism allowing her to process the complex emotions of grief, triumph, and closure without the overwhelming flood that might have paralyzed someone with different neurological wiring. She understood that they had won something important. But she also understood that victory in one battle didn't end the war against people who hurt innocent families for money and power. "Thunder's not scared anymore," Emma observed as they began their descent toward Colorado. "He did what Daddy asked him to do. He kept the secret safe until someone could understand what it meant." Sarah looked at her extraordinary daughter, seeing Tommy's courage reflected in Emma's calm determination to use her differences as strengths rather than limitations. The autism that others might view as a disability had become the key to unlocking justice for a murdered soldier and his loyal partner. But as their plane touched down on American soil, Sarah knew their real fight was just beginning. They had the evidence to destroy Blackwood's criminal empire. But powerful men with unlimited resources didn't surrender without using every weapon at their disposal. The most dangerous phase of their journey was about to begin. And Emma Kate Sullivan was ready to prove that being different wasn't being broken. Sometimes it was being exactly what the world needed to see clearly in the darkness. The revelation that would shatter everything came not from the evidence they had retrieved from Afghanistan, but from a single photograph buried in Tommy's personal effects that Emma noticed while organizing the materials for Judge Mills' investigation. Her autism-enhanced attention to detail caught what everyone else had missed in the background of a seemingly routine image of Tommy and Thunder at their forward operating base. Barely visible in the shadows of a supply tent, stood a younger version of Deputy Sheriff Jake Morrison in civilian contractor clothing. "Mom," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying the flat certainty that marked her most important observations. The bad policeman wasn't just helping the bad men. He was there when Daddy found the weapons. He was one of the people who decided Daddy had to die. Sarah stared at the photograph with growing horror as the implications crystallized. Morrison hadn't been recruited to help cover up Tommy's murder after the fact. He had been part of the original conspiracy from the beginning. His position in law enforcement had been deliberately obtained to provide protection for Blackwood's operation, making him not just an accessory to murder, but one of its primary architects. Dr. Harrison leaned over Sarah's shoulder to examine the photograph, his military training helping him identify details that civilian eyes might miss. "That's contractor gear he's wearing, not military issue. And look at his position relative to the supply depot. He's not there for security. He's there for inventory. He was probably the one cataloging weapons shipments before they were diverted to illegal buyers." Thunder's reaction to Morrison's image was immediate and visceral. The dog began panting heavily, his muscles tensing as traumatic memories flooded back with renewed clarity. Emma placed her hands on Thunder's head, using their established calming routine, but she could feel his heart racing as he relived that terrible night when trusted allies had revealed themselves as enemies. Judge Mills arrived within hours of Sarah's phone call, her urgency reflecting the gravity of what they had discovered. The federal investigation into military corruption had been stalled for months by leaks and misdirection. But now they understood why one of the conspirators had been wearing a badge and using his position to sabotage the investigation from within. "This changes everything," Mills said as she studied the photographic evidence spread across Sarah's kitchen table. "Morrison has been feeding information to Blackwood's people, warning them about every move we've made. He's the reason witnesses have disappeared, evidence has gone missing, and our case has been falling apart." Emma sat cross-legged on the floor beside Thunder, her hand resting on his side as she monitored his emotional state. The dog's breathing had stabilized, but she could feel the tension in his muscles as he processed the renewed focus on traumatic memories.
Her autism allowed her to recognize patterns in his behavior that others might dismiss, subtle indicators of the psychological warfare being waged in Thunder's mind between loyalty and terror. "Thunder wants to tell you something else," Emma said suddenly, her eyes fixed on Judge Mills with unsettling intensity. "About the night Daddy died. Morrison wasn't just there when they found the weapons. He was the one who called Mr. Blackwood to report what Daddy had discovered. He's the reason the bad men knew exactly where to find Daddy for the ambush." The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a shroud. Morrison hadn't simply been corrupted by Blackwood's money, he had been the trigger mechanism that set Tommy's murder in motion. Every phone call, every report, every piece of intelligence about Tommy's investigation had flowed through Morrison directly to the people who wanted him dead. Sarah felt rage building in her chest, a fury so pure and consuming that it threatened to overwhelm her ability to think rationally. The man who had stood in her yard making threats, who had terrorized her daughter under color of law, who had pretended to uphold justice while serving the people who had murdered her husband, that man was walking free while Tommy lay in his grave. "We need to move quickly," Judge Mills said, her voice tight with urgency. "Morrison knows we're closing in on him. If he realizes we have this evidence, he'll either run or try to eliminate the witnesses. Either way, we'll lose our chance to bring him to justice." But even as Mills spoke, Emma's autism-enhanced pattern recognition was processing information that the adults had missed. She stood abruptly and walked to the window, her movements sharp with agitation as she stared out at the street where nothing appeared unusual to untrained eyes. "He's already here," Emma said simply. "Morrison. He's been watching our house since yesterday. The blue car across the street with the man reading the newspaper. The newspaper hasn't moved for 43 minutes. Normal people turn pages when they read." Thunder rose and padded to Emma's side, his military training evident as he assessed the threat she had identified. His low growl confirmed what Emma's different way of processing visual information had detected. They were under surveillance by someone who meant them harm. Judge Mills moved to the window and carefully observed the vehicle Emma had identified, her experienced eyes recognizing the subtle signs of a stakeout operation. "That's not police surveillance," she said grimly. "Official surveillance would involve multiple vehicles and regular rotation of personnel. This is someone waiting for the right moment to act." The next few hours unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a trap closing around its prey. More vehicles appeared on neighboring streets, their occupants maintaining the kind of patient vigilance that spoke to professional training and unlimited resources. Morrison had clearly decided that eliminating the witnesses was preferable to facing prosecution for murder and treason. Emma's response to the growing danger was characteristically direct and logical. She gathered the evidence they had collected, including the recordings from Afghanistan and the damning photograph, and methodically organized everything into waterproof containers. Her autism helped her focus on practical preparations while filtering out the emotional chaos that might have paralyzed someone with different neurological wiring. "We need to make copies of everything," Emma said matter-of-factly as she worked. "Bad men always try to destroy evidence when they get scared. If we hide copies in different places, they can't make the truth disappear even if they hurt us." Dr. Harrison had been making phone calls from the kitchen, using his military connections to arrange protection that couldn't be compromised by Morrison's law enforcement contacts. "Federal marshals are en route," he reported, "but they're still 2 hours away. We need to hold out until they arrive." Thunder positioned himself at the front window.
his body language shifting into the alert readiness that had once protected soldiers in combat zones. The dog's training told him that violence was imminent, but his bond with Emma kept him calm enough to think tactically rather than reactively. He was no longer the traumatized animal who had cowered at loud noises. He was a military working dog protecting his pack. The attack came just after sunset, coordinated and professional in its execution. 3 vehicles converged on the house simultaneously, while Morrison himself approached the front door with the confident bearing of someone conducting official business. His badge and uniform were meant to provide cover for what was essentially a home invasion by armed mercenaries. Emma watched from behind curtains as Morrison knocked on their door, his smile cold and predatory in the porch light. "Mrs. Sullivan," he called, his voice carrying false authority. "I need to speak with you about new developments in your husband's case. Please open the door." "He's lying," Emma observed with the brutal honesty that characterized her autism. "His micro-expressions don't match his words. His pupils are dilated with adrenaline. His hand is positioned to draw his weapon. He came here to kill us." Sarah felt her world crystallizing into stark clarity as she realized they were trapped between Morrison's official authority and his criminal intent. There was nowhere to run, no one to call who wouldn't be compromised, no way to escape the web of corruption that had already claimed her husband's life. But Emma's different way of processing information had revealed one possibility that the adults had missed. "The basement," she said suddenly. "Daddy built the storm shelter after I was born. It has its own ventilation system and a radio. We can hide there until the federal marshals arrive." Thunder seemed to understand the plan without explanation. His military training, recognizing the tactical advantages of a defensive position with controlled access points. As Morrison's knocking grew more insistent and the sound of other vehicles surrounded their property, the unlikely family retreated to the reinforced basement that Tommy Sullivan had built to protect the people he loved. In the darkness below ground, with Thunder's warm body pressed against her side and her mother's arms around her shoulders, Emma Kate Sullivan prepared to use her autism as a weapon in the final battle for her father's legacy. She had the evidence to destroy Blackwood's empire, the determination to see justice done, and the unique abilities to survive what promised to be the longest night of their lives. Above them, Morrison's patience finally ran out, and the sound of splintering wood announced that the end game had begun. The siege lasted 6 hours, but federal marshals arrived with the authority and firepower necessary to end Morrison's desperate gambit before it could claim more lives. Emma listened from the basement shelter as boots thundered across the floors above. Voices shouted commands, and the unmistakable sound of handcuffs clicking into place marked the end of Deputy Sheriff Jake Morrison's criminal career. Thunder's reaction to the resolution was immediate and profound. The dog that had carried trauma and secrets for 3 years seemed to deflate with relief as the immediate danger passed. His massive frame settling into the kind of relaxed posture that Sarah hadn't seen since before Tommy's deployment. Emma maintained contact with him throughout the arrest process above, her autism allowing her to monitor his emotional state and provide the steady presence he needed to process this final confrontation with his demons. When they finally emerged from the basement, the house looked like a war zone. Morrison's mercenaries had done significant damage in their failed attempt to eliminate the witnesses, but the evidence they had died trying to destroy remained safe in Emma's carefully prepared hiding places. The waterproof containers had protected Tommy's final recordings, the damning photographs,
and the financial documents that would unravel Blackwood's entire criminal network. Judge Mills supervised the evidence collection with the methodical precision of someone who understood that this case would be scrutinized at the highest levels of government. "Emma," she said, as federal agents cataloged the materials, "your father would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. Your unique way of seeing the world made it possible to solve a murder that might otherwise have remained buried forever." Emma's response came with the literal precision that characterized her most important statements. "I didn't solve anything by myself. Thunder remembered everything, and Daddy left us the clues. I just helped them talk to each other across time." She paused, her hand resting on Thunder's head as she processed the complex emotions of closure and victory. "Autism means I see patterns that other people miss. Sometimes being different is exactly what the world needs." The trial of William Blackwood became a national sensation, drawing media attention from around the world as the full scope of his criminal empire was revealed in federal court. Emma testified as the key witness, her autism-enhanced memory allowing her to recount conversations and observations with photographic precision. Thunder sat beside her throughout her testimony, his calm presence providing the emotional support she needed to face cross-examination from Blackwood's team of high-powered attorneys. Blackwood's defense strategy centered on attacking Emma's credibility, arguing that an autistic child couldn't provide reliable testimony about complex criminal activities. But Judge Mills had anticipated this approach, and her ruling became a landmark decision in disability rights law. "The witness's autism does not diminish her credibility," Mills stated from the bench. "If anything, her neurological differences enhance her ability to observe and recall details that neurotypical witnesses might miss or forget." The moment of truth came when prosecutors played Tommy Sullivan's final recording in open court, his voice speaking from beyond the grave to identify his killers and explain their motives. The recording included Blackwood's own voice, giving explicit orders for Tommy's elimination, captured on equipment that the arms dealer never knew existed. Emma held Thunder's head in her lap as her father's words filled the courtroom, both of them finally able to let go of the burden they had carried for so long. The jury's verdict was swift and unanimous, guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, arms trafficking, and racketeering. Blackwood received 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, his billions unable to purchase the freedom he had stolen from so many others. Morrison, who had turned state's evidence in exchange for a reduced sentence, received 25 years in federal prison. 6 months after the trial, Emma and Thunder visited Tommy's grave at Arlington National Cemetery, where he had been reinterred with full military honors after the truth about his heroic sacrifice was revealed. Thunder lay quietly beside the white marble headstone while Emma read aloud from the Medal of Honor citation that had been awarded posthumously to her father. Sergeant Thomas Sullivan displayed extraordinary courage and devotion to duty in exposing criminal activities that threaten national security. Emma read, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her cheeks. His sacrifice prevented weapons from reaching terrorist organizations and saved countless innocent lives. Thunder's response was a low, mournful howl that seemed to carry 3 years of grief finally given voice. Emma wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, both of them mourning the man who had connected their lives across species and time. But there was peace in their sorrow now, the healing that came from knowing that Tommy's death had not been in vain. Sarah watched from a distance
as her daughter and Thunder said their final goodbyes to the man who had shaped both their destinies. Emma's autism had been the key to unlocking justice, her different way of processing information, allowing her to see connections that others missed. Thunder's loyalty had preserved the evidence needed to bring killers to justice, his bond with Emma transcending the barriers that typically separated human and animal communication. The Hayes-Sullivan Foundation for Military Families was established with the settlement money from Blackwood's seized assets, providing support for children with autism whose parents served in the military. Emma became the foundation's youngest board member, using her experiences to help other families navigate the unique challenges of neurodiversity in military communities. As they walked away from Arlington that final time, Emma looked back once at her father's grave where Thunder had left his old collar, a gesture of respect and release that marked the end of their shared mission. "Daddy always said that being different wasn't being broken," Emma said quietly. "He said different people see things others miss, and sometimes the world needs someone who sees differently to make things right." Thunder padded beside her toward their future, no longer haunted by the past but enriched by the knowledge that their love had been strong enough to bring justice from tragedy and hope from grief. In an age where the world feels increasingly divided and complex, this story reminds us that sometimes the greatest strength comes from those society might overlook or underestimate. Emma Kate Sullivan, an 11-year-old girl with autism, accomplished what seasoned investigators and powerful institutions could not. She brought justice to a fallen hero and exposed corruption that threatened our national security. Her unique way of seeing the world, often dismissed as a limitation, became the very gift that solved her father's murder and honored his sacrifice. For those of us who have lived through decades of change, who have watched our children and grandchildren navigate a world that doesn't always understand their differences, Emma's story offers profound hope. It shows us that neurodiversity isn't something to be fixed or hidden, but celebrated as a different kind of wisdom. Thunder, the traumatized military dog, found his voice through a child who communicated beyond words, proving that healing comes in many forms. This tale speaks to every parent and grandparent who has worried about a child who learns differently, loves differently, or sees the world through unique eyes. Sometimes being different isn't being broken. Sometimes it's being exactly what the world needs to see truth in darkness and find hope in the most unexpected places.